Doot, it's disorganized play. Doodle doot, it's disorganized play. Doodle doot. Today's the day where we talk Dungeons and Dragons. Woo! Hey everybody, welcome to Disorganized Play. Um, each week the theme song gets a little bit more like a show tune and a little bit shorter. I don't know how those things are connected to what's going on, but such is the case. Hey, I'm Tom Lommel. I am your host. I'm your dungeon master extraordinaire. I am here along with some of the cast in the chat to talk to you about last night's session of the Iron Keep Chronicles, which I thought was a fantastic session. I really had a great time playing, running, playing, running, and playing. D&D isn't like scissors, everybody. You can run and play at the same time. It's okay. You'll be all right. Trust me, I said so. So we're gonna do a couple things. So Thursdays we have our recap show. Wednesdays we run. Let's back. Why are we doing this in reverse chronological order? Tuesdays I tell you about the game I'm gonna run. Wednesdays I run the game. You get to watch it either back on your VOD or live along with the rest of us. And Thursdays I come and tell you how it all kind of. I had to make changes. Things were different. They did stuff I didn't expect. Such is the nature of the beast. So that's that's the format of the show. It's all about the Dungeons and the Dragons, but there's some general role playing advice. And then once in a while we work in some other topics on Thursday since we don't have to recap what happened. We can just talk about things that changed and kind of things that we found interesting. It used to be when I didn't stream the show, I'd have to tell you what everything that happened. Well, you can go back and watch. I recommend you do. This was a very good session to tune into. You might take some catching up to get in line with the plot if you haven't watched previously, but I think all of the sessions before really paid off with this one. So, what are we going to talk about today? Number one, cast check-in. Hey, the cast is here. Some of the cast is here. Amy is here. Garav is here. I don't know who else is all here, but they're here. We're going to talk about commanding the flow of the session. We're going to talk about giving it all away. We're going to talk about some of the loot that we've got for our upcoming ALZ charity event, our marathon charity stream that will start tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. And as people donate and whatnot, we're going to be doing I don't know exactly the format, if it's raffles or giveaways or top donor or how it all works, but we have definitely we have a ton of stuff to give away. I'm going to showcase some of the stuff that Evil Hat has pitched in because they sent it to me, handily enough. And then finally, if we have time, we'll do some Q&A. So let's get things kicked off. And let's ask our cast what they thought was most interesting or surprising. So unfortunately, ideally we would have them here to share in the magic, and I could have a conversation with them. That's not very likely to happen anytime soon. Everybody's got so many commitments to juggle with their schedules. So, unfortunately, we're going to have just sort of a little digital interaction where I ask questions of them through the chat, and then I will read them back to you. Perhaps role playing as either Garav Galati or Amy Vorpal. No, I am not qualified. So. uh, So Garav says the most interesting thing was, or the most surprise. Oh, the most interesting thing was Gingy, the character, the NPC, and the most surprising thing was that that Daddy was poisoned. That Thon's father was poisoned. Yes, and Amy thought it was the most interesting thing was that everyone had a connection to what was going on here. um, So I've asked Amy if she found that everyone's connected, if that was rewarding or if it was a little too convenient, or what her response was to that. Um, so, Groff says, I didn't know you were working our backstories into the plot. I wasn't prepared. Amy agrees with that. Uh, Amy says, it's rewarding. I secretly like the fact that everyone has some connection. Amy says she has some major questions for her family because did they make me this way? Is it their fault that the voice speaks to her? That was that is so. So there's a lot going on in town now, but we're a ways away from town. Oh, well, Amy can hear me. Oh, look at how perfect that is. Garav, I don't think Garav can hear me. So, uh, so Garav says, I feel like I was tricked into accepting his death when he was slowly dying in front of me, which is why I got so angry at Gingy. I let him die in front of me, just accepting it. There could have been a cure. Oh, that's a great point. Um, and I guess my question for the cast is, do you know when I'm working your backstory into the plot of what's happening and tying you more closely into the adventure, one of the things that I struggle with as the DM is that I have to make choices about things that are happening with your character that you may not have envisioned or agreed with. So I guess how do you this was clearly one of those sessions where I had made some decisions and sort of, in some cases, walked up to revealing that the voices are connected to what's going on in the dungeon. That was very clear, and that was something that was developing. Or in the case of Thawne, that was just hammer dropped in the lap. You did not know this. What you thought was wrong. How do you respond to a situation like that? Like, you've said that you think it's rewarding, right? Um, I know that there's points where there's certain times where when the dungeon master makes decisions like that, where they're definitely like crossing a line with the trust of the players. And I guess my question would be, how do you draw that line? Like, what would have been too far? You know what I mean? So what would have been like, okay, you've accepted this new piece of information and you're like, okay, well, this is really interesting. I didn't know that this was happening. Now I have more questions about it. Like like you've seemed to have accepted what happened last night as like, okay, this is a reasonable twist in the story. But at what point, like what would have been a situation, just hypothetically, where, oh, you know what, you've crossed the line with my players, you or with the trust that I have between the player and the DM. You've imposed something on my character that I don't want to deal with, I don't want to mess with, or I don't agree with. So, Garav says too far would have been your dad was secretly evil and working for Belloc, and Amy agrees with that. Yeah. So, and I apologize. Thursdays is bad for my internet connection. I don't know why. So stick with me. It looks like it's hanging in there, but we get a few dropped frames every once in a while. So, uh, Amy says it would have been too far if my family was doing it to get back at me for something, or if they knew I had special powers and were trying to get rid of me. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And I think those are the types of twists that are very easy for a DM to write into a story. Oh, wouldn't it be great if it turns out that, you know, that uh, that Tack's family secretly hates her and they're trying to get her, like, get rid of both of the kids and get them killed on this mission. Um, it's easy to write that as a piece of fiction that you think is is a cool reveal, right? Oh, then they'll never see this twist coming. And the problem is that you have to obey two audiences. You have the people who are watching, right? Um, and even if you're not streaming your game, you have like the audience that's in your mind, like, oh, would this make a cool story? Would a reader be interested in this? And then you have the audience of your player who has to participate and they have to be complicit in this reveal, right? And that's where you really have to kind of like walk this delicate balance between those two things, right? Of it's easy to write this huge like um, super rewarding thing uh, and then have it go awry, right? So uh, Amy is like, what is that? What's happening? No, I'm not saying that that's what's happening. I'm giving that as an example of what would be too far, right? So you said it would be too far if if they're yeah if you had special powers and they were, you said earlier it'd be too far, Amy, if your parents knew that your character had special powers and they were trying to get rid of your character. So I read that as like, oh no, she's this weird mutant child. Let's let's get rid of her. That's not at all the story that I'm going with. I was just using that as a hypothetical of like that would have been too far. Well, that's not the story, but okay, that's an interesting example of what would have been too far. And you could justify that as the DM going like, "Oh, yeah, they don't want this weird freakish mutant kid." And so they're going to send them on this suicide mission and just hope that they disappear and never come back, right? They're going to send them to the heart of this awful sunless citadel thing that's been perched out on the edge of town, 7 hours outside the edge of town. So it's easy to justify that sort of extreme situation, but then have it fall flat on its face when presented in play, right? And have the players go, "No, I don't want my parents to love me for whatever reason. I don't want my parents to be bad people." Um, and I think we saw a little bit of that last night when Tack said, "Have you met my parents?" And Gingy said, "Yes, I have met your parents. They haven't been here in a long time." And I was like, "What do they want?" Well, they want this wood, this apparently supernatural wood or whatever it is. And then it was like, "What? Why? Why are they involved in this?" And it's like, "Oh, well, maybe they didn't get involved voluntarily. Maybe they're sort of seduced by Belloc, who gave them this wood, the first one's free kind of thing, right?" So, BSB Care makes the point it needs to be a rewarding twist for the players and not just for the audience. So, that is the scoop there. I mean, I agree with that. Yeah. So what I guess since we talked about what was the most interesting part of the session and we talked a little bit about DM and player trust, uh, let's just explore a little bit what was frustrating for you, or do you feel like there's elements that either aren't clicking or they're just not quite working, or there's something happening, you're like, well, I wish this could be better or different, right? Room for improvement. PB Dragon brings up a good point, which is it's a fine line between creating an interesting story that will challenge the player to become a hero and messing up with what they had in their head about their character. So that's a terrific point, which is so many origin stories of characters are they come from this background of immense trauma, right? Uh, uh, whether they're orphaned or troubled youth, or they were slaves, or they were abused, or that sort of thing. And then, of course, they turn around and out of adversity, they blossom into heroes. Some people like to think that the hero's journey doesn't start with a traumatized backstory, but actually starts when they sit down with the character at their table and blossoms from there, right? Or they like to assume that their characters are heroes to begin with. And I think oftentimes, we do talk quite a bit about having an arc and a story structure and modeling kind of the hero's journey in certain ways, or at least certainly modulating the pace and the flow and the arc of sessions so that there's a build and a payoff and things like that. But it's so easy to steal stuff from fiction that does not necessarily apply or intersect 100% with the way the game actually plays out, with the play experience between the boundaries of trust between the DM um, uh, the DM and the players. So, and also, as S. Del Castillo points out, there's always a risk of taking away player agency. And that's one of the reasons I actually wanted to kind of touch base about this, because I made some I would say pretty heavy decisions about where the storylines and the backstories were going to intersect with the plot between those characters, and that that's the realm of the players. Is I get to craft my backstory, and I get to create the character that I want to create, and I have an idea of an origin for them. And anytime you're sort of poking and prodding and manipulating that, you're crossing over into their territory. So, all right. So here's some question, or what could we improve on, right? Amy says she's a role-playing fan. The last two sessions were mainly hack and slash battles. So this one with more RP really scratched an itch. So and I agree with that, and I think that that's one of the things, of course you're not privy to, since I kick you guys out when we have our little DM conclave here in the chat. But that's one of the things that I have really tried to recognize and adjust for between the material as written and the play experience that we actually enjoy, right? So it's incumbent upon me to look at what the different players at the table respond to and make sure that they're getting served up something, at least on a regular basis, to stay hooked in the game, to stay satisfied with, just to stretch the muscles that they want to stretch, right? And Grav agrees that it was a nice break to role play the majority of the time. Thawne and Grayson were able to show how badass they were with that shadow thing. Chimes in BSB Care. Amy got to take her new mystic powers out for a test drive, so that was nice. I did feel like oh, it was 11 o'clock. And this combat just popped up. Should we just cliffhanger it and come back and address it? And then I was surprised at how fast that shadow got dispatched, right? And that was not your standard run-of-the-mill shadow. So it was nice to see the party really kind of focus fire on this creature and get to stretch their combat muscles a little bit, but also dispatch this thing, which I didn't want to have a 45-minute combat. That was not what I was interested in at that point of the session. It might have been in the cards, it might have been set on the table, but I'm glad that it didn't play out that way. And I didn't expect it to be a 45-minute combat, but you never know, that stuff can drag on. Yeah, so Amy got to be some overpowered support for the for the team. She chimes in, I've never been this much of a support character, and I gotta say, I kind of like it. So it works good. It works good. BSB Care points out it boils down, this whole issue of player agency boils down to the fact that there has to be mutual trust between both sides regarding the backgrounds. And that's true. I have to trust my players are going to accept some of the offers that I'm going to put out there and some of the ways that I'm going to shape the world. And at the same time, my players need to show at least a certain degree of willingness to accept the little twists and tweaks and torques that I put out there. And the more that you trust each other, the more that you can bend those things around. But it's definitely a case where, as the DM, because I'm controlling the flow of information, I can make course corrections to, oh, okay, well, that's the it's clear that they're getting upset by this in a way that that's leaning towards they don't want to accept what's going on. So let's get some more information about that. Let's clear. Let's course correct and clear some hurdles that maybe are impeding our understanding of what's going on. Or let's bend the understanding and bend the stated facts because they haven't been stated yet. Like, let's bend my preconception of how this is going to play out so that it fits in a way that's copacetic with what the players are responding to. Yeah, so PB Dragon, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Making the idea vague enough that the player gets to kind of make the decision in some respects. And that's sort of the basis for all of like my whole Schrodinger's clues approach to dropping information out there and just letting it sit and brim and bubble with potential, and then as it gets defined, you're able to shape and mold it in a way that pays off for everyone involved. Yes, BSBK, thank you. So Garav says there's not a lot that he would like to see improved in the sessions, other than having a full custom map every session, and then we can save some time from drawing on the tiles. That's that's up to the chat. My wife is cackling because she knows that Garav is playing directly. He's plucking my heartstrings, my DM crafting heartstrings, in a way in which I find it difficult to resist. So there we go. And Christian Linky points out this is a great piece of DMing advice, which is players write the best solutions to any mystery, right? And I've said this before, but I think it bears repeating that when you present a problem to the players, a mystery to unravel, even something as simple as an encounter where they have to, say, find a secret door or unlock a riddle or a trap or something like that, you've got 4 other brains all furiously working and pouring information and pouring processing power onto this problem. It's very unlikely that you personally are going to come up with a solution that's more satisfying or more inventive than the 4 of them together processing away on this thing. Now, that's not to say that you have to accept the very first solution that they propose, but you have to be open to, oh, okay, well, what's the cool, you always have to be open to what's the coolest possible thing that could happen next. And the corollary to that is your players very often will come up with what the coolest possible thing is that could happen next. You are not the sole gatekeeper of what's cool. So listen to them, be open to the things that they suggest, spin off or incorporate the ideas. You don't have to accept their ideas wholesale and go, oh yeah, that's what happens. That's certainly an easy shortcut sometimes, and why not? Like, just run with it. Yeah, oh, that's a great idea. Nothing encourages more ideas than paying them off immediately with like, oh yeah, that was a great idea. Okay, well, people are going to suggest more things if they feel like they have a stake in helping to shape the story. All right, so there's a lot of different bits of advice there. So, Garav, I think I'm going to kick you and Amy out at this point. And we're going to move on to a couple things called commanding the flow and the rest of our topics. So, thank you for joining us. So, they have been properly dismissed. But yeah, I think all of I think yesterday's session was it was a great session. But here's the reason that it was a great session is that we had laid the groundwork for all of this stuff over the course of the previous sessions, right? So there's a couple things to take away from that. One is we had dropped enough hints that something was going on with Amy's character, and that something was going on with the goblins and all of that sort of stuff. Um, that's those are threads that led up to this session, right? But the flip side of it is that you can't just string your players along the entire time. At some point, it's got to actually lead to a conclusion. I'm getting ahead of myself here, and this is really more related to the giving it all away topic. But I just want to take just a brief, I'm going to dip my toe in this, then we'll come back to it, which is yesterday's session was so successful because there were so many elements that had been foreshadowed. We had used our plot radar to build up the suspension so that when we finally shone light and on what was actually happening, it was satisfying to know these answers, to learn these things, to probe what was going on. All right, we'll circle back around on that, but yeah, BSB Care says, I mentioned last night as the RP was going on that I could picture pinging the plot radar as things were going on. I mean, I took that, just the little post-it note where I'm like, I want to cover these 4 things. I took that little post-it note and just slapped it on my map so that when I got it out and looked at it, it was right there along with the map. So I always had, these are our 4 big things. We have talked about this stuff enough over the past 3 weeks that it was, present in my mind anyhow, but I wanted to make sure I had that, like we're going to hit these things. Let's go for it. So commanding the flow. This is just something briefly I want to talk about, which is if you go back and watch, or as you were watching it yesterday, there are moments where you will see play sort of break down, right? Either fall into a stalemate or get caught up in moments of sort of limited exploration, or somewhat pointless exploration. Let's put it this way: your players are always going to either stall out on what they should do next. They will fixate on something that's not important, that you're not prepared to make important, or they will get into some sort of unilateral argument that cannot be resolved, or would take a long time to resolve. Like, those are situations where play will break down, right? That's if you go back and watch, those are moments where I, as the GM, watch for those things, or see those things happening, give it a little bit to run to see if it's going to resolve itself or come to a conclusion, and then intercede. Okay, here's a new role that I need you to make. Here's a new circumstance that you have discovered. You happen to notice. You happen to hear. Here's a perception check. Give me a perception check. You can interrupt that flow and redirect where the player's attention is going. So they got out into the hallway, and this is the prime example of this. They got out into the hallway and they started arguing about, oh, this heart thing is weird, and Tack, you shouldn't be playing with this thing, and this is leading down a dark path, and what do we do, and do we trust you, and all of those issues that they don't actually have the means to resolve in a satisfying way, because there's this push me, pull me type of situation where ostensibly they think, in character, it's not unreasonable for them to think Tack is possessed by some sort of malevolent force, and maybe it's going to come to the point where we need to subdue her and exorcise her, or purge, somehow have some PvP combat. At the same time, on a metagame level, they know we're all 4 players who need to cooperate, we need to get along, we need to find a reason for our characters to trust this character and accept her into our party, because it's boring for us to just argue kind of endlessly about how we think you're bad or tainted, or whatever the case may be. And as BSB Care points out, that's when that argument kind of came to this unilateral stalemate where that we weren't making any more ground, no conclusions were being drawn, and that they were just sort of butting heads. That's when Gingy the Poisoner shows up and interjects, and now the whole conversation the whole direction of the session changed. And you can do that with something as simple as make a perception check. You hear a noise. There's something down the hall. Or you can be, I mean, it was a heavy-handed move, but why not just have, like, why delay this any longer? Here comes the main NPC of the evening. Let's start our showcase encounter. Let's get the players more information that will help them decide how to resolve this struggle. Right? Well, now we've got more information that, oh, okay, well, there's this weird wood, and the parents are somehow involved, and they're trading silver, and now the mayor is implicated in some sort of shakedown or protection scheme for the town, and the militia is also involved, etc., 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 right? So it you have a bully pulpit when you're sitting in the DM's seat, and you have a responsibility to let your players play these types of arguments out. It's role playing, it's character development. It helps them work through the plot and kind of establish dynamics between the various characters. But there are also times where it becomes counterproductive, and it becomes a waste of time, or it's not satisfying to some of your players who are like maybe combat monsters. And it's your job to monitor, give them the line to, spool them enough line to let them have these discussions and establish these relationships and boundaries. But when it comes to loggerheads and it's no longer continuing to build, reel them back in, pull them back into some other part of the game. So that's it. It doesn't take a lot of finesse. It's not, in terms of the tools that are at your command, it can be as simple as give me a perception check, and whoever gets the highest, you hear the sound of something heavy being dropped. Sounds like maybe 50 or 60 feet away. And then you hear a grunt. Okay, well, now all of a sudden they've got a new task. They've all got something unified that they can be focused on. And if what's going on is unproductive, we can move to a more productive part of the session. So the tools are very simple. The skill of letting them run with it for a while and then knowing, you know what, this is going on long enough. Like, that's something that you have to learn through experience, right? But it is essential that you take on that responsibility and you know how to wield that power, because it's very difficult for the other players at the table, maybe that combat monster guy who's getting bored. It's very hard for that character to intercede in like a party argument or something like that in a way that changes the situation in a meaningful manner, right? So in other words, if the party's already at loggerheads, it's hard for somebody to come in and shift the balance one way or the other without somebody in that conflict feeling like, oh, I've lost. Well, now we have, well, okay, we took a vote and everybody rules. Great, all right, I'll go along with this. They're mad about it, right? But if you can successfully intervene as the DM, the conflict is still theoretically there, right? But now that all of their attention is diverted in a completely different manner, well, there's no losers in that situation, right? Or we'll get back to this. Everybody's happy. Fine, we'll get back to it. And then, well, maybe they learn something, and it changes the perception of that conflict. And now all of a sudden, it's not players just beating their heads against each other, and creating frustration, not only from a character point of view, which is not such a big deal if you can separate it from the personal point of view. Why are we arguing about this? Why can't you just understand where I'm coming from? That kind of character versus character argument often turns into a player versus player conflict. That's what you don't want at your table. It's fine for the characters to argue with one another and to have a different point of view. I'm a paladin, I'm lawful good, I don't believe in murdering these goblins. Listen, they're evil scum, they're addicted, they're torturers, they're malicious raiders. Every one of them should be put to the sword. I haven't met a good goblin in my entire life. Well, those are two perfectly valid points of view that can't be resolved without somebody feeling like they're giving in, they're accepting a loss. And you saw that a couple sessions ago when they were arguing about whether to kill the goblins, and Grayson went off. He heard this noise. Great, intercede. We're gonna redirect the flow. So if you go through, you'll see that's one of the DMing skills that isn't necessarily specifically called out, but will help bail you out of trouble spots, both in the pacing of your game and in the personal interdynamics of your game. All right, so I'm going to quick pick up on this question here from James V, who says, how surprised were you that Avril tried to save the kobold but accidentally killed her instead? Well, I wasn't that surprised that she tried to save the kobold, right? Um, that the party has established a good rapport with the tribe of kobolds, so for them to be on friendly terms and see like this is a victim who needs to be rescued, that was 100% reasonable to me. In terms of the kobold accidentally getting killed by the weird vampiric vine bush thing, that was really a function of bad rolls on her part, and I had decided like just normal weapons are not gonna cut this particular supernatural weird like thorn bush thing or razor vine or whatever you want to call it. And so some of it was, in my mind, this is a more difficult encounter than you just cut the vines, right? There's something more going on here. I think if she had rolled better, she would have been able to save Sterna, and maybe then they would have had to do some sort of like rescue return type of thing or something like that. It might have changed the session slightly. They could have gotten some information perhaps out of Sterna if they'd healed her, etc. But as it was, the twist on it kills her, but then brings back around this theme of the plants reanimate the body, and the plants talk to Tack and all this sort of stuff. Like, it reinforced some ongoing themes that we had already established in earlier sessions. So I felt like it was a good avenue to highlight those again and bring them into discussion between the players, right? In a way that was probably more productive than Sterna. Thing is, Sterna's going to know some stuff probably that Gingy also knows, so it would be a little bit of duplication of information, but it would be a different perspective on it. I don't know that I was really prepared to roleplay Sterna, but I don't think I don't think it would have been a huge challenge. You can always have Sterna just be like, I'm exhausted, I don't remember stuff. That's not always the most rewarding. You need to feed out some clues, some information when they bring a PC. They go to the effort of bringing a PC like that back, but certainly they're not going to have the depth of knowledge that an accomplice like Gingy is going to have. So I wouldn't say I was surprised. I wasn't caught off guard. She rolled badly once, and I'm like, well, if she rolls good the second time, then I'll let it go. But she rolled badly the second time, and she hit with like a total of 12 or something like that. I'm like, nah, this is a more of a fine-tuned operation. These are these weird razor vines that are directly going into her circulatory system. I will say the only thing that I was surprised about is that was too much body horror for Havana, for the player. That legitimately caught me off guard, which I should have been somewhat prepared for, but that was like a mental note, like, oh, okay, well, like, it's easy to like go the weird sort of alien chest burster type of route with describing this sort of stuff, but it was totally like squicking her out, and it was important to then scale back on some of that description. That was the part where my DM red flag went up. Oh, we're going into legitimate, problematic territory, and it may be worth having a discussion with the players of putting an X card on the table, like, oh, this is going too far. Like, just let's tap out and rewind and revisit. I often talk about having an X card when I'm tweeting at Dungeon Bastard and talking about different issues that are sort of borderline and things like that. you don't think that body horror is one that's going to come up like this, right? That's not really, it's, in terms of things that are going to trip a player off, it's not super high up on the list. But as we saw last night, like it mattered to her. She was getting uncomfortable, and so we had to kind of divert away from that. So that's that was something about that encounter that surprised me, and that I need to pay attention to as we go forward with the campaign, right? And I feel that that's sort of a personal challenge for me, because that sort of description is easy to drop into. Oh, there's something weird wriggling underneath their skin or something like that, right? And it does, like the description of it can just get creepy. Um, as Christian Linke points out, that body horror is one of those places where you can genuinely create uncomfortable moments for the players. Um, it it feels it at least in terms of improvising details for me, it feels easy to make stuff like that up, and then you don't realize just how disturbing some of your descriptions can become as you're explaining what's going on, right? And the other part of it too is, I think in my early career as a DM, it was easier to ignore that stuff. And as I have gotten older, I've gotten more sensitive to it. And I think some of that is just by virtue of the fact, like, I've been in the hospital, I've had surgery done. I've had friends who have had, I've seen, you know, suffering through chemo or whatever it is, right? And so as you gain your life experience, invariably, like, those things become more personal and hit you harder than when you're 19 and you think you're bulletproof and invulnerable, right? So that's just one of those, like, as you experience life, hopefully you become more sympathetic to to uh, the sometimes very real and very gritty experiences around you. So, um, yeah, it's definitely it's a place to be sensitive, and it's something where, as Christian Linke points out, you can lose a player because they're like, no, nope, I'm not interested in this. And I will also say, like, there are certain things that are especially vulnerable to this type of problem, and that's Call of Cthulhu for sure, right? And then also just the prevalence of so much of the alien kind of alien and aliens, parasite host type of stuff, which is so deeply ingrained in pop culture, to the point where, like, I think both the aliens thing and Cthulhu stuff is overplayed and cliche. I, I, I just I see Cthulhu stuff on Kickstarter and whatnot, and I I get the appeal, but I'm burned out on it. It doesn't hold a ton of interest for me personally. I'd like to see some new spins on whatever you do is futile, and invariably you are going to be tainted or driven insane or corrupted, and join the forces of evil or die horribly, right? Like, I feel like that's the core Call of Cthulhu story, and maybe it's just I don't have enough experience with that genre to really see what the other opportunities and options and arcs are out there, but it feels a little tread worn to me. That's all. S. Del Castillo says, I ran a few AL games. The store I did it at kept an X card on the table for this very reason. If anything that was happening being said made a player uncomfortable, they could move their card forward and the current line of conversation would be scrapped. That's exactly, I think it's smart to take that precaution. I know there's a certain there's a certain cavalier attitude out there on the internet that's like, oh, we can get by without it. And I will fully admit, like, I'm lazy about it. I don't put it out on a regular basis. But it's easy to have on the table and never use, but it's hard to put it on the table when you need it. So I don't mean to sound like, oh, like it's not a sign of weakness to put something like that on the table. And I think unfortunately there's a certain faction of the internet out there that portrays it like, oh, you don't have the guts to just sit around and talk about this stuff at a table. It's all just made up fantasy stuff. And it's like, number one, you don't know everybody's lived experience at the table, and number two, it's just smart planning. It's like saying like, oh, what, you think a fire could start at your house? What, you don't need a fire extinguisher, you should just be able to tough it out. Okay, just like a little bit of precaution can save you a lot of headaches. So that's the huge thing, right? As Old Smoky says, you can't always know your players, right? And it is a way to build player and DM trust rather than a sign that you have failed to establish DM player trust, right? It's getting very heady today, you guys. But these are all important topics to talk about. I don't regret talking about this. And as you can see, like, I struggle to like articulate like why these are good ideas and where to go with this. And I don't always implement this stuff the way that I should. But last session was a highlight. Like, you know what? It's not a bad idea. And what does it take away from the game? Nothing. Are you intimidated because somebody's going to share their feelings, that they're feeling uncomfortable? You're the one who's really having the problem here. All right. So, and sometimes your players, it's fine if they want to. If they don't want to tap out on the X card, it's fine for them to share their boundaries with you in a different way. As Christian Linky points out, it's not everybody's comfortable just publicly pushing that card. If that's the situation, then you need to make sure that they understand, if you're running like an ongoing, like an AL game or whatever, that they can come to you with issues if they have them. Or if you sense like, oh, I feel like something weird is going on here, it's okay to have a private check-in away from the pressures and the eyes of the rest of the table. Whatever form that takes, whether it's an email or a chat in the parking lot or what have you. Like, we're all people playing this game, and it's a game about communication and trust. Like, fundamentally, like, it's based on communication and trust. And if those things start to break down, it's incumbent upon you to reinforce them as solidly as you can. So, there we go. That's commanding the flow. That was we got deep into that one. Giving it all away. So I touched on this earlier. I just want to touch on it briefly at this point, given that we're at 5 to 3, and I don't want to go super long today. Yesterday's session, we dumped a ton of information into the players' laps. We essentially gave away the entire plot of what's happening. Now, as we talked about on Tuesday, there was a big reason for this, which is when the players get to what is scripted to be the final boss fight, you have two options. If you don't include this NPC, duplicitous lieutenant in the form of Gingy the Poisoner, the only way that you can explain what is going on is to either have the villain try to monologue as the players are furiously trying to start initiative and destroy them, or have some sort of journal of, here's my master plan and here's what explains everything, etc., right? So to me, those were both suboptimal offerings. The monologuing thing does. I mean, we almost saw a case of it here in this past session where their main, for lack of a better term, Cluebat was gonna get sniped by Thawne because we get to this point where there's the reveal that Gingy created the poison that killed Thawne's father, and he was like, "I'm out for blood immediately. I'm gonna kill this guy." And we actually had to have a contest between the players, like between the characters, to talk him down, to have him stand down from starting a fight and trying to kill one of the main mouthpieces of information here, right? So the monologue thing just does that as I think anyone with a modicum of DM experience has learned probably the hard way. That does not work well. The journal thing is not bad if there's a set of ledgers and clues or whatever it is. The problem with that idea, in my opinion, is it's two different things, right? One of the problems is you have to create a lot of material in order to explain the plot. And that eats a lot of prep time, I've found. Like, I enjoy having those handouts and things to share. And, oh, look at this. And then you found this. And, and they get them on the table and they'll start looking over them. And then they start putting they put the puzzle pieces together themselves. That's very satisfying if they can do it. But oftentimes they look at these things and they start drawing conclusions, and the conclusions that they draw are completely different than what's actually going on. And sometimes what's actually going on is rather important, right? As much as I'm a fan of take the player's suggestions and mold that into your story, there's also times where your suggestions are setting up something else that's important down the road, 2 or 3 or 4 sessions away, right? That needs to guide them. There are major functions fulfilled, or there's just major insight to be gained, right? Like, if we had doled out a bunch of journal clues and they had never come upon or come to the conclusion that Thawne's father had been poisoned, no big deal. It does not matter. Like, that's not an integral part of what's going on. But if they couldn't figure out, like, how are Dell and Gregory even involved in this thing? If they can't puzzle that out on their own, they're just going to be frustrated. And that leads us to the second problem with the sort of the post-mortem, here's the treasure trove of documents, the incriminating packet that unlocks the mystery, which is so much of it ends up being the DM going, well, so actually, here's the thing, here's what's really going on, and you just end up telling them anyhow. And that is also unsatisfying. I mean, there are moments, certainly, when players are going to go, so what was really going on with such and such? And you can tell them, and they're fine with that. But they don't want to unlock the entire plot of, like, this whole mystery that you spent 7 or 8 sessions building up, by at the end of it going, well, what was Gregory and Dell's deal? Oh, yeah, you never found out, but it turns out that they were trading with Belloc for da-da-da-da-da. The only place that sort of thing leads is to this dissatisfying moment where the players, like, scratch their heads and they go, well, how are we supposed to know that? It makes the players feel stupid when you just straight out tell them the plot. It makes them feel like either they did a bad job putting things together, or it makes them feel like you did a bad job laying out the clues, and neither of those things is a fun and satisfying play experience, right? Either they feel dumb or or you look bad. You do not want to put yourself in that kind of position. So that's why I think it's dangerous to have the big payoff be a bunch of documents. I love the idea that, like, halfway through, and we saw some of this, right? We saw this with the Goblin trade log. Oh, here's some things. Well, I wonder what this means. Well, they can draw conclusions, but they don't have to be definitive conclusions. And that leads them someplace, and it also leads you someplace. So, yeah. Christian Linky says, my next session is the live equivalent of a 3-hour cutscene. Yeah. Yeah, as BSB Care says, imagine if Bilbo or Frodo simply found a journal instead of going on the journey themselves. Yeah. So those are Those are your options that you have if you don't have a better way of delivering the plot. Well, the answer this session was, let's find a better way to deliver the plot, to pay off some of these questions, to give them an opportunity to interrogate someone in real time about what's going on. And, oh, well, if that's true, then do you know this person? And, I mean, that sort of session helps them tie things together, but feel like they're directing the mystery. They're directing the line of questioning. They're leading themselves to a conclusion. Certainly Gingy, like, dropped bombs that nobody was expecting. That whole thing about Thawne's dad being poisoned. But look at how it paid off. It was amazing, right? Like, oh, wow. And now all of a sudden Thawne is like, whoa, he is out for blood. He is so tied into this group and this story and what's happening. And it's such a powerful pull, you know? And prior to this session, his parents were sort of undefined, and his father figure was this guy he looked up to, and it was all. I mean, I don't mean to cast it as like bad character development. I think he did a lot of character, and obviously he had spent a lot of time thinking about it, but it was a little nebulous and amorphous, and not connected to the stories of the other three characters who are involved in what's going on, right? Now he is right there. The reins are, in his hands. He is whipping the horses as fast as he can. Let's go get this guy. I'm mad. And when we come back, I'm going to get that guy too. Like, he has motivation that was not there before. And it's amazing to see that just snap into contrast. So, all right. Yeah, my players like to kill and not talk. That's a valid play style too. You have to develop around what what the hooks are for your particular player's play style. And we had a big combat session that my players were underwhelmed by. That's not their thing. They love role playing. They love character hooks. They love solving mysteries. In Havana's case, she loves going and screwing with the thing that she's not supposed to screw with. She likes a mystery. They like figuring out sort of riddles and puzzles and things like that. And combat is honestly fairly low on their list of, reward levers. And you can press that button and get the food pellet, but they as often as not, they're just going to sort of sniff at it and reluctantly, chew away on it. So that's something to keep in mind. Is like you find the levers of excitement and intrigue and motivation and satisfaction that work for the people that you have at your table. Yeah, so I'm curious to see how this is going to play out. Like this aftermath, this post game sort of after the big battle type of thing. How that's going to work out? Are they going to keep their pledge to Gingy and then try and kill Gingy, or what are they going to do? I don't know, but the final point I want to make on this topic, and then we'll take a look at some of our loot. I don't know that we'll have time for questions today, but we had a lot of good discussion today. So I'll tackle one or two if somebody's got one floating out there. The final point I want to make is when you have a lot of amorphous, sort of not yet defined Schrodinger's clues. It's like improv. If you can you have to get to the answer, and you have to get to the specifics. And I like Schrodinger's clues because they allow me to mold the answers in conjunction with the players, but at some point they have to pay out or they're not going to be satisfying. And the thing that's important here, and the thing that applies to improv, is when you get to that moment of giving it away and telling them, here's what's going on, here's who's involved, this is the twist, etc., etc. Oftentimes you're going to be afraid of approaching that moment. You're going to be like, well, if I tell them the whole story, then they know the whole thing. And what I want to assure you is that that's not true. There's always more story. There's always another place to go. Barring like the end of the story is it's a TPK and the party's wiped out. Even then, you can think of a way to continue that story. They come back as ghosts. They come back as revenants. We cut to 10 years later, and that guy's son takes up his sword in vengeance and swears to go and retrieve the lost battle helm that his father carried with him on his final mission that he never returned from. So the story in a serialized fiction like Dungeons and Dragons doesn't have to end. It's in fact it's incumbent upon it for the most part not ending. So don't be afraid of dumping those things, like coming to that moment where everything drops in their lap and they start putting a bunch of pieces together. You're not going to run out of pieces, right? That just turns into a large piece of a larger puzzle. This leads to... So here's how this applies to the game that we're playing. We dropped all of this information about what Belloc wants and how the goblins are involved and da-da-da-da-da, all this stuff, right? And you would think, okay, they now have the plot figured out. They know who's in charge, they know who the bad guys are, etc. Yes, but they now have marching orders to go back to town, deal with the mayor, deal with Dell and Tack's parents, find out what's going on with the goblins, deal with Gingy on the way back. Like there's at least 4 or 5 different new threads that need to be followed up upon now that they've got this piece of the story like kind of like firmly in their grasp. So I know in my heart that impulse, like, I can't tell him because I don't know what's going to happen next. Be confident in the fact that there's definitely something that happens next. There's always a place to take this story next. You might have to sit down in between sessions and think about what those possibilities are. You might have to sit down after the session and quiz your players. Where do you think this goes next? What are you curious about? What's bothering you about what you've learned? Those are great places for inspiration for you to then incorporate that stuff, twist, adjust, move on, take it in a whole new direction. But don't be afraid of, for pacing wise, it's always good to, yes, string some clues out and slowly build suspense and slowly accumulate knowledge. But as we talked about on Tuesday, that's got to ramp up to a crescendo where there's, boom, this burst of revelation. There's this moment of enlightenment where these elements come together. I see the connections. Ultimately, that's what improv always is we're taking disparate elements and we're placing them out on our game board. And then, all of a sudden, through the magic of improv, which is just talking, I see how they all fit together. I see the pattern now. That's what D&D is. I'm dropping these breadcrumbs, and eventually they lead to the witch's house. And I burst in there, and I kill that witch, and I save those kids. So, like I said, I understand the impulse. What's going to happen to you? That trepidation? Fight it. You can get there. There's another step to take. Don't worry. And if you don't have the answer, you can always plumb your players for some possibilities. All right. So that is giving it all away. That's pretty good. As BSB Care points out, Arthur Conan Doyle brought Sherlock Holmes back after he had killed him. Thomas W. D. Young says, I was wondering how much you had decided beforehand and how much was in the moment. For instance, with Tack's family, how they were involved with Belloc. When she asked if her parents had been there before, it looked like you were trying to work out if it would be a step too far to say yes. I definitely, the reason I brought it up at the top of the show when Amy was in the stream was I wanted to know, Like, okay, have I crossed the line? Because this is pretty heavy stuff, like to make your parents complicit somehow with the villain. Now, I think we got to the point where we turned it around where it's they were complicit, but they had been, kind of lured into this thing, right? When you're coming up with these various story forks and possibilities of ways things can go, it's useful to identify, okay, this is, like, to use some Dungeon World terminology, this is a hard move and this is a soft move. Okay? So from here on out, a hard move to resolve this storyline is, guess what, Tack? You're not actually even a real child. You are a half flesh creature that has this wooden heart that they carved using the magical wood from the Golthius tree. You're Pinocchio, essentially. You've been brought to life by two parents who were desperate to have children, and this was the only way they could make it happen. That's a very hard move to lay that on somebody's character. Now, story wise, wow, that's fascinating. I love that idea. I think that could go a lot of different places. That could really take off. But you know what? It's not my character. If I want to have a story like that, I can invent a whole raft of NPCs that I can screw around with and literally like puppeteer to my heart's content. But that's a hard move, and you have to like read your player whether they're going to follow you there, because the last thing you want is for them to go, that's okay, that seems pretty weird. Okay? This soft move here is there to portray them sympathetically. Oh, well, this guy came to the village and he told us that he had this rare wood that we should try, and it was amazing results. We couldn't believe what we got out of it. And then the next thing you know, well, we needed some more and we couldn't find him. And then he was asking us to make offerings and sacrifices that we weren't really sure that we were right to do. But business was so good, we sort of got caught up in it. We stopped asking the questions I guess we should have asked. Okay, well that's a soft move. That's pretty easy for the player to accept, that their parents, the character's parents, are human and they have flaws and foibles, and they accidentally stumbled down this awful path and they're caught up in it and they didn't know how to get out of it, and they're so grateful that you finally freed them from this horrible bargain that they had struck. Right? So that's when you're creating those story forks, think about, are you making a hard move that is going, I mean, out of those two things, sure, her character is the Pinocchio figure, is far more magical and intriguing and kind of epic fantasy. That's the more epic fantasy choice, right? But that doesn't mean it's the right choice for the player. So yeah, I was definitely like, as this interview is going along, I'm definitely like feeling them out. I had those opportunities on hand to kind of like, okay, I'm going to follow it a little bit this way. I'm going to follow it a little bit this way. It was the same thing with the reveal about Thon's father. Is, I figured he had the possibility of being really angry with, how does the fundamental question is, how do you keep any of these characters sympathetic to the players, right? How do I keep this really repulsive kind of mad doctor type of character sympathetic to the players when he essentially sort of brags about creating this poison that killed Thon's dad, who's he's got this huge relationship with? Well, you put him under this magical compulsion. I didn't want to. I wouldn't have used it on him. Would have used it on somebody else. Okay, well, it's still creepy. He's not, hey, let's be honest, he's not a particularly sympathetic character, but they've struck sort of this devil's bargain with him. All right. So I think the final takeaway from your question is I had considered all of the things that I said. I'd considered most of them ahead of time. Okay, well, where would we go with these sorts of facts? And I wanted to have a couple different options on each of them so that when the moment came and I'm reading the player on what's happening, I don't make a misstep and either cross over that line of DM player trust or feed them something that totally doesn't make sense. All right. So a couple other things. Gingy doesn't have to be in the dungeon when they return back. BSBK makes a suggestion that maybe when the curse is broken, Gingy could take off or something like that. Yeah, that could be interesting. I don't know. I don't think that's. I see where that's a possibility, right? And I have to just share with you my DM gut feel is that's the obvious thing to happen. And I'm always a little bit hesitant to make the obvious choice. You come back, he takes off, you know, you know, or he's not even there, or he grabs the ring and puts it on and disappears. You're denying the player that opportunity for some sort of resolution that they might want to follow. And it's a little bit Deus Ex Machina. It's a little bit you're sort of stealing some agency away from them when you do that. It's far better to have the guy fight it out. They get him down to like 5 hit points or something like that, and then he turns into a bat or he assumes gaseous form and floats away. Right? So if you're going to have that sort of escape valve type of thing, well, Gingy's got a plan. That makes sense. Gingy does have a plan. But in terms of the play experience and the plot, it's far better to have him play out his plan and have the players have a chance to disrupt it than to have that happen off screen. Oh, he's gone now. He's taken off. He leaves a note behind saying, "See you, suckers. Thanks so much." So, and I think it's a little bit of a betrayal of the pledge, you know, the understanding that was made in that meeting. And if you want to play that kind of, you know, bad guys make bad pledges, that's fine, but it taints the next time you have a villain NPC make an offer. It taints the player's trust of that NPC hugely. And I think, for me in this particular game, to set up that kind of dynamic is going to be bad because they want to role play and they want to talk to people. And if they inherently don't trust a lot of people, then that breaks down. If they are conditioned to believe, oh, okay, I'm going to let them have it with my sword because they're going to turn on me as soon as they get whatever they want, it creates a bad dynamic and it sets a bad precedent. So, James V wants to know, were there any paths that you backed away from last night because of the players' responses? Well, I think the main one that I backed off of was like getting Dell and getting Dell and Tack's parents too complicit with Balak. That was clearly something like that was clearly a path that my read on it was Amy was not comfortable with. She was not going to accept that very easily. Now, I managed to split the difference, right? Because her leading question, essentially like, have you met my parents? Have you seen my parents? That's what she asked, right? But the question behind the question was, how deep are my parents involved in this? And recognizing that, that's when I said, okay, let's take a turn into, you know, repainting them as more sympathetic. I've met them, but it's been a long time since I've seen them. And then we kind of follow this path of, well, how did they get involved? Well, Belloc actually approached them first. And if that wasn't clear to, you know, I'll have to go back and look at the play session, but if it doesn't seem like that was clear, I want to reinforce that point when they go back to Oakhurst, or maybe when they have another sit down with Gingy or whatever, right? So that was the main piece of it that I backed off on. I feel like I sort of waffled a little bit on the mayor's involvement. Clearly, the mayor is getting painted as a villain character, and but I didn't make him like a hardcore villain character, right? So that's still a little amorphous, but that's okay. I'm all right with that. They're gonna get to the bottom of that down the road, and I have time to read them on where they think that's going and what is going to be a satisfying payoff for those sorts of things. All right, so where are we at here? It is 3:22. Thanks everyone for joining me, by the way, and the sub ups and whatnot. um, yeah, we'll talk on Tuesday about. We've got a big boss fight coming. That's really sort of the next. I think we're probably going to have next session will probably be a boss fight and then some sort of denouement resolution with Gingy. I think that's probably going to take all of next session if I had to predict. And like I don't want to brag too much, but I said about 5 encounters, and that's about what we did, right? We got that huge role playing encounter, and then we did a couple rooms with the Goblin Gardeners, which that was another case where like let's manage the pacing here. He rolls a nat 20, fine. Let's dispense with this encounter. Yeah, it could have turned into a big combat. Thank God it didn't, right? Let's keep moving. And the next room turned into a combat, or 2 rooms later it turned into combat. Great, fine. So I think this boss fight we have to find ways to make it exciting and intriguing, and I think we'll probably have to dress it up a little bit from what it is. We'll talk about that on Tuesday. And I don't think we can leave like unless we really run long. I don't think we can leave Gingy hanging. Well, let's address that head on toward the end of that session. So those are the thing. I haven't decided whether I'm going to battle map the boss fight or not. We have a tier now where the way we set this up is we start in Theater of the Mind. There's a cumulative donation goal for the night where if we hit 125 or what it is, we move on to gridded combat and we draw the battle map in real time. If we were to hit 250, then that would sort of be taken care of. If we had done that earlier, it would have been done for last session, for this session, etc., etc., etc. So that 250 stretch, I know it's a ways to get with donations, but it's designed to sort of basically give you gridded combat for 2 or 3 sessions, right? Kind of depends upon how the pacing works out, but I don't know. I haven't decided whether I'm going to battle map it out, and I think that's sort of a topic for Tuesday for our prep session. I'm not in a position to make a lot of decisions about. I have to think a lot more about how to make that battle interesting and what elements are going to make that battle interesting, and that will help inform in my mind, like, does this really call for a grid, or is it more appropriate for a Theater of the Mind style, or how would one transfer from one to the other, that sort of thing. All right. So the last topic I want to cover today, we did cover quite a bit of Q&A about specifically the game. So let's talk about the Alzheimer's Marathon that's happening this weekend. Brian Patterson is coming into town tomorrow afternoon. He will be playing in my game Saturday morning, my Unlikely Heroes game, which is my Marvel superheroes game, where the premise is that you are all essentially random tourists on the Vegas Strip, and the little green men come down in their flying saucer and start spraying death rays and the strange gamma radiation from their alien craft causes your particular people to mutate and suddenly gain powers, which I think will be fun and cool. And then in the afternoon, that my game's at 8:30 on Saturday. It all kicks off Friday night. We'll cover this when we wrap up. But in the afternoon, I'm going to be playing in Brian's game. He's going to be running Carthoon, a D&D session of Carthoon. So we have some prizes that we're going to be giving away to our donors, and I just got them in the mail today from Evil Hat. So big ups to Evil Hat for kicking in and contributing. This is all in support of the Alzheimer's Association. Last year we raised $5,600. We're hoping to top that. We'll see what happens. But they sent us 3 different pieces of tie-in fiction for Spirit of the Century. These are Spirit of the Century tie-in novels. Stone's Throw. Harry Connolly wrote King Khan, and Stephen Blackmore wrote Khan of Mars. So we're going to be giving those books away. Those are going in the prize package somewhere. Also, I don't know if you have tuned into this fancy little show called Tabletop that Will Wheaton runs, but Ryan Macklin ran a session of Fate Core, and we're giving away a copy of Fate Core as part of the stream. Secondly, or penultimately, I don't know how to describe this, but Brian is the artist in residence for Evil Hat. That's one of the reasons that they contributed some of these prizes to us. So he did the illustrations for the Kaiju Incorporated RPG, essentially sort of Ghostbusters meets Pacific Rim style of play. I believe you might need Fate Core. Yeah, you need Fate Core or Fate Accelerated to play. But we're going to have Brian sign this. He did... let's see if I can find a good spread of the art inside here. So he did the art inside that. He also, in conjunction, did the art for the Kaiju Incorporated board game that Evil Hat put out. It's a card game, and I don't know if you guys watch the Dice Tower at all, but Tom Vassell over the Dice Tower gave this actually a great review, gave it his seal of approval, and said it's a lot like Machikoro, but he likes it better than Machikoro. So for all of those all of you out there who are board game nerds, those are that's a weighty judgment indeed for him to say something like that. And then finally, if you didn't back the Kickstarter, we have a copy of Carthoon itself that we're going to give away. Now, this is system agnostic. You can use it for Fate. You can use it for D&D. It is not stat heavy or mechanics heavy or anything like that. But this is Brian's personal campaign. It includes a huge fold-out poster map and the background of his world and the deities involved, etc., etc., etc. We flipped through it here a few weeks back when I got my Kickstarter copy. So we're going to be giving this away. You can't actually get this in stores yet. It's not available. If you did not back the Kickstarter, you're out of luck until the middle of July. So admittedly, it's 3 weeks away that the book is going to launch in your FLGS. But if you are I don't know, lucky winner or big donor, I'm not sure. It's up to Megan Caves and Jordan. They're helping to coordinate the prize patrol on how these things will be assigned. But we are going to give away a copy of Carthoon, and of course we'll have Brian autograph that for you as well. So I'm super excited about this weekend. I have some prep to do and to get together, but I think it's going to be a great weekend of gaming. Let's take a look at everything that's involved, shall we, everyone? So, tonight, of course, is Mr. David Crennan, Star Wars Edge of the Empire game, Never Tell Me the Odds. You can tune in for that with his crew. That will be fascinating. In the new space, I'm very excited to be in the new space. It's obviously very much a work in progress. We just moved in Saturday and Sunday, so there's improvements that need to be made, but it's a big step up for us to be. I don't know if you can tell, but it's just that much bigger that we can actually put the table sideways and fit everybody around it. We wouldn't have been able to do that in our old space, so there would have been 2 people would have just been jammed against the wall. So it's our own space. It's bigger. It's under our control. The old space, we had to be able to, on a day or two's notice, move everything out and store it and put it in a closet. This is our place, so we have installed a lighting grid. We have painted a green screen in the back of the room. We are planning to decorate those beautiful blue walls with something more interesting, but also more permanent. So there's a lot of things that are happening in that new space, and I'm excited about it. And a lot of that is thanks to you all for contributing and supporting our show, whether that's on Patreon or just directly with donations or what have you. So we wouldn't be we wouldn't be taking this step if it weren't for the support and the backing of people like yourself at home. So let's get into the ALZ Marathon. This is, as I've said before, this is a charity that is near and dear to my heart. I lost my grandmother to this disease. Let's take a look at what's getting played. So Friday night, tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, Black Bag Vikings kicks things off. Then I always have to make this bigger because I'm bad. So Black Bag Vikings kicks things off. Then at 11:30 Pacific time, Werewolf Wild West. I'm not entirely sure who is GMing Werewolf Wild West, but that's okay. Roll for Shoes with Jordan Caves Callerman is coming up at 4:30 a.m. on Saturday morning. I come in at 8:30 running my Marvel Superheroes game, which I just described, and at 1 o'clock I will be playing in Brian's game of Carthoon. That goes until 5 or so. At 5:30 we have Wizards, Warriors, and you to round the whole thing out and get us back around to 7 o'clock. So that is our 24-hour marathon. We have a bunch of other prizes. By no means is this the only thing that we've kicked that has come our way. We've had some really generous sponsors, including Arc Knight and some other people. Campaign Coins is kicking in a pack of coins, etc. So we have some great other prizes that we're going to hand off to our donors. I hope you can tune in. At least tune in for the fun if you can't tune in for the prizes or make a donation or whatever. These things are always it's always a great chance to play something that we wouldn't normally otherwise play, or to just goof off with some games. And like I said, I'm genuinely thrilled that thanks to your backing, we're able to bring Brian in, have him sit down and game with us live on the stream. I think that's going to be so much fun. He is a great character, and I have only gamed with him once. I gamed with him at sort of after Gen Con, sort of post Gen Con party event. We got to play Time Watch. We get to play Time Watch together. He played a Neanderthal who could only learn 9 words, and I think I taught him 3 of his 9 words. That was super fun. So it's going to be an exciting weekend. I hope you can all join us. It's really going to be fantastic. All right. So with that in mind, I will be back on Tuesday with another prep session of Disorganized Play. Wednesday is the final show for Dungeons & Dragons Improvised Campaign for at least the next 3 months. We're planning to come back in the fall, but we're taking the rest of the summer off to kind of retool and find a different place in the calendar and make sure that show is really in line with the best offerings that they have over at Geek and Sundry. Hopefully we can make that happen. And then Wednesday night, of course, we're up for another session of Iron Keep Chronicles, and Thursday I'll be back with Disorganized Play. But until next time, thank you so much to our mods. Thank you to all of you who back us. That reminds me, one other thing here. If you are a Patreon backer, in the Iron Keep folder, I have added my notes for this past week. I have added the alternative storyline for this past week. That includes some details about Gingy the Poisoner, how I have how I changed the dragon encounter, the shadow and the dragon encounter, some details about the goblins that were encountered in the goblin gardens, or in the fungus gardens, etc. So if you want to see, they're not the notes that I ran the session off of, okay? Because I went in this morning and touched them up and added in some details that got decided at the table. So you will see sort of the revised version of the notes based on what happened last night. So you have kind of the up to snuff version that I kind of wish I had when I sat down. But I didn't add a ton of stuff. So much like I had provided those notes before for the goblin areas that they had been taken over with the drug addiction and things like that, you can get that same little PDF download. If you are a Patreon backer, you'll get access to that special backers only folder, and inside that there's a folder specifically for the Iron Keep, and that's where I keep my notes, my maps, my handouts for things that I don't just openly share. There's certainly things that I openly share with you guys in the channel that are publicly available, but the Patreon backers they always get some extra goodies, and this is one of those. So please, by all means, join our Patreon, and if you want access, that's the way to get it, because I'm not going to give all my goodies away for free. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much to Farquaad and all of our other mods. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. I really appreciate your time, support, and attention. Tell your friends, tell your family. It's summer. I know things are a little slow, but we appreciate all the eyeballs that we can get on our channel at any given time. So we will see you, if not Friday night, for Black Bag Vikings and the rest of the ALZ stream. I hope to see you Saturday morning at 8:30 for Unlikely Heroes, the Marvel Superheroes adventure game, and Cartoon later on this weekend. Until then, let's dungeon! 127 in a row!